What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the comic books that I picked up this Wednesday, give you my impressions, and let you know whether there's something to go back to the shop for or not. To start things off, we're going to talk about Mosaic number 4 from Marvel, and this is the story of Morris Sackett, an ex-professional basketball player who finds out that he's an Inhuman, and his power is to switch bodies. However, there was a small reveal in the last issue that basically stated that he cannot go back into a previous body that he's already possessed. And that's pretty important because where we see Morris Sackett right now is pretty interesting, as he has taken possession of the one and the only Spider-Man. And most of this issue actually takes place inside the mental structure of Spider-Man. And this is where I find things getting a little bit frustrating. There's a point in time during this whole conflict between Morris and the psyche of Spider-Man where Morris succeeds in overpowering Peter Parker's Spider-Man, like his internal struggles and things like that. And essentially, Morris Sackett insinuates that there's an inherent weakness in Spider-Man because he's a grinder. He's not a natural talent. He's not that kind of person that Morris is, who's actually really egotistical and self-centered. And I just feel like that is sending the entire wrong message. And I find, not because I'm a Spider-Man fan, but because the actual context of what's going on here is just like seeing somebody that is obviously not, it doesn't seem righteous in that kind of sense. Not everybody that's a good guy always wins, but I just feel like it's sending the wrong message, and ultimately, considering all the people that Spider-Man's gone up against in the past, having more Sackett, this brand new Inhuman, overpower him inside his own mind is frustrating, to say the least. So that's kind of got me in a really odd place. It's one of those things where if you're interested in the book, I'm interested to see what you guys think about that particular part of the story, but it's one of those things that's kind of turning me off to it right now, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to continue because of that, but I'll let it process for a little while. Next, I'm going to talk about Spider-Gwen number 15, so this continues the Sitting in the Tree arc between Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy from Earth 65, and what we see here is that there's a connection between these two because of their fathers and the situation that arises, and it's not a great crossover so far. I can't really see myself enjoying it that much. I don't necessarily know what the particular reason for this is, but because of what's going on in the clone conspiracy and how everything else is interacting, I find that this is probably the least interesting part of the Earth 65 Gwen Stacy kind of relationship here. I'm sure that what they're doing is going to be fine, but it's just one of those things where it doesn't make me want to read Spider-Gwen or Spider-Man any more than I already want to. And Spider-Gwen's kind of been low on my list, so I'm not sure where this one's going. I know where it's going in terms of a story, but it's just not enticing. That's what I'm gonna have to say about it. So it's unfortunate because I was really enjoying Spider-Gwen up until recently, and this really hasn't done anything to kind of make me want to read it more. Next, we're going to talk about Venom number 3, and Venom number 3 continues the story of Lee Price as he carries on being in possession of the Venom symbiote. We still haven't found out at all what happened to Flash Thompson, and we see this situation where the Venom symbiote itself has been demeaned. It's one of those interesting things where instead of creating a much more parallel character to Lee Price, they essentially belittle, or they start letting Lee Price belittle the symbiote, which is a really odd choice for how the narrative's going to go. I would much rather have seen them be equals, kind of in conflict consistently, but having Venom be the reluctant hero of Lee. They've got the reluctant hero portion of it, saving somebody that you dislike, because that's a redeeming quality of the Venom symbiote. However, being like, you're a dog, you need somebody to be in charge, and it's just like, that kind of sucks, man. That's another one of those things where it feels like the wrong message to send, and it doesn't really resonate with me in that respect. I don't want to see, like the Venom symbiote become somebody's whipping boy. That just doesn't really flow with where things have been in the past. So it's starting to lose me a bit on here. Maybe I'll give it another issue, but I might not even make it that far. Once we're done with Venom, we'll talk about Green Lanterns number 15, which is a one-shot story arc, which is leading into the next story, the next big arc, which is going to be really about Batman. But that's a different story, because this one is all about Jessica Cruz and how she overcomes things in her daily life. So if you're interested in more and more character development regarding Jessica Cruz, her anxiety, and things like that, this is definitely the issue for you, because it dives into those things really deeply. But as much as Jessica Cruz can become a compelling character, it's not necessarily what I'm here at a Green Lantern story for, and I feel like, it's just not what connects me to the characters that are in question. So, while Green Lanterns has been pretty decent, and, there are a lot of really good fans about this, I'm just not necessarily stuck on watching and seeing this story unfold at this point in time. It hasn't done enough to kind of grab me and pull me back into where it's just like, oh, Green Lanterns is a must read. I just don't feel that part of me right now. It's just not really there. It's one of those things where you guys might be 50-50. If you really like the story development of Jessica Cruz, you are going to be all about this one. However, it's just not quite the right book for me. And after Green Lanterns, we talk about another green character, and that is Green Arrow. And Green Arrow number 14 is awesome. It's like this roller coaster ride. It's an action movie. It's taking in all these different things about Oliver, and it's really kind of distilling them into who the Green Arrow character is. And the whole action aspect of it, the Vice Squad is a relatively interesting situation here. The cop that he basically beat up has turned vigilante in his own city and is just mowing down criminals regardless of whether they deserve it or not, just because criminals are evil. That whole preconception in that respect. So I'm really liking where this one's going. Ben Percy's kind of picking back up. After we hopped on the train for a little bit, it just kind of left me in terms of how well this book was going, but this is a much stronger kind of follow-up, and I'm really interested to see how the Emerald Outlaw story arc really kind of transpires. I'm really excited about Green Arrow. It's one of my surprises from DC Rebirth, so it's definitely one that I think you guys should be checking out. Then after Green Arrow number 15, we can go to Justice League number 13, and Justice League number 13 is a tie-in from Tim Seeley, which is really telling the story of Steve Trevor. So it's not really about Justice League, it's about, Steve Trevor and his experience while this Eclipso Diamond is out in the wilds and it's impacting everyone that's around him. So it's very odd because there's all these kinds of different things. We're not necessarily sure if it's real or if it's fake what's happening, because there's all kinds of different violence and things like that are happening inside the world, and it's just really, really odd. I'm interested, but it seems like Tim Seeley took a very violent approach to the way that this Steve Trevor story went, and there were some situations where you're just like, did he just really pull the trigger and blow the brains out of that guy? It's like you're just wondering, and you don't really know because of what's happening with the Eclipso Diamond. So it's definitely an interesting book. I know that Brian Hitch is going to be coming back onto this, so I'm going to enjoy Justice League while I can. However, that does lead us straight into Justice League vs. Suicide Squad number 5, and this is where we see exactly how devastating the corruption of the Justice League could be, because they essentially take over the world in about 7 to 11 minutes and place Max Lord as the emperor of the entirety of the world. And this is just ridiculous. It's just like the Flash disarms all the weapons of mass destruction in the entire world. Aquaman secures the coastlines with all kinds of different sea life and technology. You've got Wonder Woman, who's basically taken control of all the different world leaders. And Superman is just like Supermaning it up. It's kind of ridiculous. I really like the interactions between, say, Batman, Amanda Waller. Lobo comes back because, of course, he comes back. He's the Wolverine of the DC universe when it comes to regeneration. So it's really exciting to see where these things kind of go and how this kind of makeshift Justice League Suicide Squad matchup is going to be. Because, there's the cliche kind of Justice League moment where Batman kind of honorarily brings those, villains into the fold in that respect. There are some really cool kind of things that happen in the book, and it's definitely a really good example of how to execute a large-scale event, and it's been rapid fire, which has probably helped it out a lot. So once we're done with the team-up book, we can now talk about a team book, and that's U.S.Avengers number 2, which is actually giving us a little bit of the backstory for Danielle Cage, which is evidently the daughter of Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, who has become Captain America in some sort of unknown future. So this 20XX version of Captain America explains exactly what happened and why the skull, the Golden Skull, is back in this timeline and how it really arrived. What Al Ewing has been doing with this book is creating a really kind of fun, fantastical, out there really concept for the U.S.Avengers, or the AIM, the New Avengers, whatever you really want to call it. But it's just really kind of a lighthearted take on everything. I like the fact that, you've got Bryce Wynn, who's basically, Bruce Wayne, a billionaire. And there's this whole kind of scene with the tuxedos and whatnot. You've got Squirrel Girl in a tuxedo with her tail just sticking out. It's ridiculous, and it's really enjoyable. So that's what if you're looking for something that takes itself a little bit less seriously, U.S. Avengers is definitely a good place for people, especially if you're a fan of any of the characters that are in the book. Al Ewing is writing a very good story. At least that's where it seems to be going, so I'm really excited to see where that one goes. Another interesting story is going to be Nightwing number 13, which actually sees the Runoffs kind of disband. After their conflict with Orca and then realizing that a man died on their watch, they're not necessarily ready to accept the fact that they can become new heroes because they still feel like they're not villains, but they are villains. They're just not good enough to be heroes. Without this team of villains as backup, Nightwing goes in to try and save the mayor, who's now the target of this last murder that's going to be happening as part of this kind of secret cabal that's been kind of controlling Bloodhaven. And Defacer comes in to save the day, and this whole detective is there. It's a really interesting story, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the result of the Bloodhaven arc, because are they going to run him out of town because they don't really like superheroes coming in and solving crimes for free, or are they going to accept Nightwing and make him part of their own? That's going to be the thing to watch out for. Definitely a book that I've been enjoying reading, and one that I'd recommend to other people. Another book I've really been enjoying and one that I'd recommend to people is Black Hammer, and Black Hammer's giant-sized annual actually came out, and this is telling another Colonel Weird story where it actually goes through different aspects of each hero's life. And what's happened is they've actually encountered this kind of parazone entity all the time. Like Abraham Slam has had this kind of being really come in and ruin his life, or at least impact it in some way. You've got Golden Gale, who's had that chance, Barbalian, who's had that, as well as Madame Dragonfly, as well as Colonel Weird himself. And to see all these different artists come in and take on these different parts of Jeff Lemire's story is fantastic. You know, you've got Mike Allred, you've got Dean Ormston, who did, the cover. He's part of the co-creation of this thing. But you also have, like, Dustin Nguyen, who does Descender. It was really a fun book and really kind of helped enhance these characters. So there's no wasted issues in Black Hammer, which is why it's one of my favorite independent books of the year. If not, actually, it's my favorite. It is easily my favorite. Definitely one that I recommend. And then there's a book that I was ragging on a little bit last time that it came out, and that is Invincible Iron Man. So issue number 3 came out, and what do we see? Oh my god, within the first few pages, Riri Williams has a brand new suit. God forbid that could have happened a little bit sooner, or it could have happened a little bit later. I mean, I'm not really complaining about this title, because what I see is, it's fantastic, because, there's no more false advertising for the cover. Riri Williams now looks like a smaller, version of Iron Man. It's a little bit more effeminate, a little bit more form-fitting. It feels like the right suit for Riri Williams compared to what used to look like a War Machine Mark 1, Mark 4 kind of suit for her character. And I like the aspect that it's not necessarily Tony Stark throwing away all his Iron Man suits, or at least a portion of them, in order to train this girl, but it's actually kind of her working through it on her own. However, having Tony Stark there should not be a form of opposition. It should be a form of enhancement. That's the only thing that I really see in this. And what we're getting is we're actually getting more enhancement from Pepper Potts. She's better as a moral support in that situation. We also see that Tony Stark's mom, his biological mother, is taking over Stark Industries. She's kind of reined everything in, put Friday in control of everything, even though Friday may or may not go all Terminator 2 on her. Judgment Day, but it's one of those things where there are points in this book that are actually really fun, and they're really looking to progress the character. I just can't wait to see where this story ends, especially with the reintroduction of Tomo, the Inhuman tech golem. She's going to be pretty fantastic, and seeing her, Pepper, and Riri kind of coming into conflict with the whole tech-based ninjas things, it's going to be really interesting, and I'm going to give this first arc a really good chance, and then I'm probably going to reread the whole thing and go over it in a little bit more depth, just because it's one of those things where I'm not necessarily sure if it's the pacing, but I feel like there's a lot of good stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily fit into where it's supposed to be. It's like the puzzle pieces happen to go together, but they're not quite putting the picture together the way that it feels like it should be. But definitely a book that I'd still recommend for people, and it looks like it's going to become more promising as things go on. And then I've got another book from Jeff Lemire, and that is Descender number 18. So this continues the Orbital Mechanics storyline. And what we see is, well, we've had the devastation of the in-betweeners, the Queen in-between's people of cyborgs and cybernetically enhanced individuals. They unfortunately are wiped out by the Gnisians. And then we actually see Tim 21 actually escapes with Tesla and Dr. Kwan and stuff like that. So we actually get to see these kind of things going, and then we actually see what's behind the UGC's real plan for what happens if the Harvesters come back. So it's a really interesting story with a super big twist at the end of it, which, may or may not be given away. All depends on what your perspective is. And I'm really excited to see where this one goes going forward, especially the kind of real results, not the results, the consequences, what really happened to one of these characters, and I'm really interested to see where that kind of unfolds in the future. I'm really excited about Descender. It's one of my favorite independent books, and it's one of the best independent books out there right now. However, now that we're done with the Descender, we can go right into the Clone Conspiracy number 4, and this is a really... Oh man, I am unexpectedly happy with how the Clone Conspiracy has been going. It's not necessarily because I enjoy how Peter Parker's being portrayed or how the story is. I find myself really interested in how things are unfolding. And it was just like the amazing turn of character that was completely expected, but that happened midway in this book, with the snap of his fingers, just went from, potentially, misguided individual straight into supervillain territory. And I was super stoked on that. That was a great validation of that character and their turn of heel. I'm really excited about that. It's one of those things where it's going to be interesting to see how people come back from this entire mess. And I mean, it is a mess. We'll go into more detail in the review of the Clone Conspiracy number 4. So it's one of those things where I'm really excited about where this is going. And the fact that it leads into Amazing Spider-Man number 23 is interesting, because Amazing Spider-Man number 23 isn't really a very good story, per se. What it does is essentially, if you've been reading Clone Conspiracy and you read Clone Conspiracy number 4, it takes like 4 panels of that entire interaction and expands it into an entire book. It says, hey, this is the interaction between Peter and this clone Gwen Stacy. And then it takes that moment in time and blows it up onto the big scale, so that way you could have a lot of dialogue, a lot of interaction between Peter, between Gwen, and how these things really interact inside Peter's memories and how he came to make the decision that he did. Because in the book, it seems like, yeah, no, this is just Peter's firmly held beliefs, and then we just kind of dig more into Peter's personality and how those things are impacted. I didn't necessarily feel like it carried the weight or the gravity, the gravitas that it really needed to in this particular issue, and I felt like if you actually oversized Clone Conspiracy and put some of the more key points into it, it would have been a little bit better, but I can't really blame it. It's way better than any kind of tie-ins that we've had from Silk or from the Prowler, but it's still one of those things where it just doesn't necessarily feel super essential in this respect. There isn't necessarily enough here to be like, yeah, you've got to buy Amazing Spider-Man 23. Not in the way that Amazing Spider-Man 22 was a mess buy. That was an issue that you had to read. This one, not so much. Now that we send Spider-Man on his way, we can talk about Gamora number 2. And Gamora number 2, it just continues being a stellar book from Nicole Perlman. I'm really excited about where this book is going, simply because not only do we have one badass female protagonist in the form of Gamora, who does everything that she can to annoy Thanos, her surrogate father. And even though there's a complete lack of Thanos in this, I really like the developments. I like the personifications of the characters. I like the environment of Ubalex and the characters that are interacting on that. I like the idea that this one character is really trying to kind of be helpful but undermine the entire thing so that way he can reap his rewards. And I really enjoy the fact that the main Badoon princess character appears to be someone that, Gamora is going to like, or that, possibly not want to take her revenge on, maybe a daring duo traveling across space. That sounds like it's going to be a really interesting book, and I like the way that it's being written. The pacing is on point, the art is great. I'm just really a fan of where this Gamora book is headed, and it's becoming one of the must-read books from Marvel Now 2.0. Definitely one that I'm enjoying, and that I would recommend people picking up, especially if you're a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy, the movies, the comics, whichever you choose. Of course, we also need to talk about Trinity number 5, which continues along the kind of like whole Black Mercy storyline, which includes Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. And this one sees us kind of see the story of Poison Ivy, or at least from her perspective, as well as the story of Mongol from his perspective. So since he was basically last seen buried in a pile of Black Mercy, he has recently found out that this is his dream domain that was created for him by the Black Mercy. And he actually spawned himself a daughter, a child that he taught how to, become brutal and kill and become evil and those kind of things. And that is the child that Poison Ivy fell in love with, which caused her to try and kind of bring this whole thing about, because Superman is evidently a source of solar radiation greater than almost anything else on the planet. So that's why she tracked him down. And I mean, I understand where Francis Manapul is coming from, because you can't just have, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all there and be like, oh my god, every secret identity is exposed. But that just makes Poison Ivy, who's a doctor, she's a scientist, seem a little thick. It's just a bit of a stretch, but I can understand the motivations behind it, but that doesn't make Trinity any less of a good book. I'm excited to see where the ending goes. However, I do feel like this Mongol story arc, while it was good, in terms of the presentation, it just wasn't quite as strong as I would have liked to conclude the first arc on this, but it's not necessarily going to drive me away from reading it at all. It's still one of my favorite books to come out of DC Rebirth. And another one of my favorite books right now is Ultimates Squared number 3. So Ultimates Squared is a story of the Marvel Cosmic Universe and the people that are out there trying to solve the problems of it. And this is going to be Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. It's going to be T'Challa. It's going to be the Blue Marvel. It's going to be Monica Rambeau, a.k.a. Spectrum. It's going to be America Chavez. And then we've got Galactus. We've got Connor Sims, the new Herald of Galactus, Herald of the Lifebringer. And this is just a big old cluster of cosmic schlop that's going on right here. And not only does Al Ewing go ahead and murder the Living Tribunal in issue number 2, he also has the I don't necessarily if you'd call it audacity, but he has the cojones to go out and just restructure the entirety of the top-level Marvel Cosmic Universe by merging and bending it to its will. I am really intrigued by what this means for how things really are going to unfold from there, and whether there's going to be any kind of consequences or if there's going to be any more kind of things from Secret Wars that are going to be showing up in this. I get the feeling that it has to. Just the idea that everybody is starting to know that reality was somehow restarted and that's going to basically breed consequences further on down the line. I'm really excited about Ultimates, and for anybody that's interested in anything about Marvel Cosmic, this is going to be your place for the most information. But then we have to get in line for the next big book, and that is Batman number 15. And Batman number 15 continues the rooftop storyline, which opens up in a pretty risque manner. You know, a little Bruce and Selina action sitting on the top of the roof covered in diamonds was always a really interesting setup piece, but to come immediately back to that is really interesting. And then we have the whole continuity crossover aspect, which makes me think that because Bruce remembers the origin in the first meeting of Selina to be different, you know, as a old woman in disguise, you know, a woman in disguise as an old woman trying to steal some diamonds and things like that, whereas Selina remembers her first introduction to Bruce and Batman as him disguised as a drifter at basically protecting Holly Robinson, who was her friend at that point in time. That draws us from very different pieces of Batman and Catwoman's continuity, because his remembrance of Selina Kyle is one of the earliest origins of Catwoman, where her remembrance is during the Year One storyline, which is back in like Batman issue 404. It's like insane where this kind of comes from. And the interesting thing is that I feel like this is Mitch Gerads and Tom King's possibly saying the reason that they remember things differently is because of DC Rebirth. You know, that's possibly a little hint, a little tease in that aspect. You know, while we do get answers to other things like who killed 237 people, we do have a few more questions, especially if we want to understand whether these differences in continuity and the differences in remembrances have any impact based on where all these different parts of the universe came from to create the new Earth. So I'm really excited to see where this is going to be going in the future, especially with the announcement that there's a crossover between Batman and the Flash regarding DC Rebirth and the Button specifically. So this is going to be interesting, and Batman still is a must-get book for anybody that's a Bat fan, and probably a really solid book in DC Rebirth too. Of course, Batman number 15 is going to lead me into my favorite DC Rebirth book, and that is Superman. And in Superman issue 15, we continue to see the events of Multiplicity. And Multiplicity is supposed to be this giant crossover between Superman and multiple universes, and that is exactly what we get. And we get introductions to brand new Earths. So we get Squad Superman, who's leading the Justice League of Assassins, which is pretty fantastic. There's all these other different versions of Superman. And what we do is we gather all these Supermen and women into one particular place. So they're on this ship, and then they decide to basically expose themselves inside the universe to kind of create some bait for this character that we now know as Prophecy. And this is the person that is coming to grab and absorb all these Supermen and these superpowers. And what does Superman do? He sends everybody away. So instead of seeing this giant cascading battle of Supermen versus this hulking multidimensional being that's killing Supermen at will, we're going to see Superman fighting Prophecy on his own. So, while I understand that, because Superman is out there to protect all the individuals, he's out there to be this beacon of hope and protection, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a little disappointed. We're not going to see all these Supermen like throwing down. I was really excited for that aspect, and it kind of took me away from that at the end. So it's like, I'm still really excited for Multiplicity, but I just felt like it was a bit of a bait and switch by the time the book ended. I'm interested to see where the conflict kind of goes, and I'm still on board for the storyline. But man, what could have been is just a touch more promising than what's going to happen right now. And we might still get it before the end. I don't know, because it's not over yet. It's one that I'd say recommend, I'd stick around for it. That's definitely what my recommendation is. Stick around for it, because Superman hasn't disappointed yet, and I don't think this is going to be the first time. Now we can move on to new number ones, and the first one I want to talk about is Mighty Captain Marvel number 1. So while we did have Mighty Captain Marvel number 0, which is really kind of an odd retelling of her origin story, there's a few different things in there. Mighty Captain Marvel number 1 is the first official book in her brand new title for this springtime. And it's not for me. while I completely understand exactly where everything's going in the storyline, the whole idea of Captain Marvel as a kind of superheroine that gets kind of hooked up with Hero Man. There's this TV show. How is a TV show going to fund Alpha Flight? I really don't know how that would work. I love the fact that there was like a little Kelly Sue DeConnick reference on the director's chair. That's awesome, but it's just one of those things where I just knew that this book wasn't quite for me after reading the first few pages. And I'll probably pick it up in passing. Maybe I'll give the entire first trade a chance, but it's just not quite the right book for me. It just didn't quite hit the chords that I needed in order to feel like it was going to be something that would be entertaining and enjoyable for myself in the future. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and pick it up, especially if you're a Captain Marvel fan, because this is where you're going to be getting the healthy dose of Carol Danvers. However, I'm going to get my Captain Marvel fix in Ultimates Squared, which I'm already really enjoying a lot. Next, we'll talk about probably one of the best books, if not the best book of the week, and that is Curse Words #1 from Charles Soule. So this is a ridiculous story, because essentially what we see is Wizard, W-I-Z-O-R-D, not Wizard, which is odd on its own, come to Earth. Basically he shifts into this plane of existence, using his magic, and immediately he just, gets bombarded by police, they're on horseback and stuff like that. He freezes them, just instantaneously, takes the horse, heads off to this church, climbs up into a belfry, and then it takes like 36 days to ready this potion. And over the course of these days, he becomes accustomed to the world around him. He finds it interesting. He finds that people don't necessarily live as slaves like they were around where he was. He sees the differences in the better parts of this world, so he decides to essentially become its savior, to battle against those who wield magic who would cause it harm. So that's a really interesting concept. It's this kind of role reversal for this character who came here as a destroyer of worlds. He was going to just smoke this entire plane of existence with a single potion. Instead, what he does is he becomes the protector and is doing wizard work for hire. So people that want to pay him, they're willing to, to get magic. They're going to pay him whatever. And it's usually in things like sapphires and jewels, but primarily sapphires. So we see this kind of Justin Bieber analog get turned into platinum, which doesn't really save his life much, especially against his fire hydrant. Maybe he should have picked a better metal. But we see him doing things like, he puts out forest fires. He, creates food out of nothingness to solve hunger crises. He goes to the UN to say that he comes in peace. And then we see him also do the magical equivalent of steroids for a pitcher in the major leagues, which is, he has no moral center. It's just like, yeah, I'm here to help however I need to be as powerful and as rich as I need to be. So I was really enthralled by the way this was. It wasn't really the mature kind of sensibilities that you would expect out of a title like Curse Words. It was actually just really fun, really vibrant, really fleshed out, and I'm really excited to see where this story goes. By the time we're done with it, though, I'm not necessarily sure how much longer he's going to be a good guy, because we did see him basically shrink the entire equivalent of Yankee Stadium and put it in his pocket. So that is not necessarily a good guy kind of feat, but he takes off, and we'll see what the consequences of that action are in the next issue, which I highly recommend you guys go grab after you read the first one. It's awesome. Next, we can talk about Monsters Unleashed #1, which is the big event book coming out of Marvel, and it's a lot of spectacle. That's what it really comes down to. There's a lot of spectacle, there's a lot of heroes, there's a lot of different characters that are all kind of thrown into one melting pot that are all battling all across the world. So you've got, Black Panther, you've got Shuri, you've got the Avengers, you've got the Champions. You have all these different groupings of characters, and they're all taking on their own individual monsters. And then you've got this kid, Kid Kaiju, who is evidently calling upon these monsters by drawing them inside his sketchbook, and that's where we kind of leave off the first issue. So I'm not necessarily sure exactly where this is going to go, and I can see a lot of potential, I can see a lot of fun in it, but the spectacle of seeing my favorite superheroes webbing up and punching monsters in the face is great and all. There's this really great scene with Hercules and Thor, which is awesome, and it was really fun, but it's just one of those things where I'm not necessarily sure if it justifies sticking along with the cover price. So it's one of those things that I will follow along with slowly and tepidly to see exactly where it goes. I can't quite recommend it yet. And then to finish things out, I have Justice League of America Rebirth, The Ray. So this is the essential introduction of The Ray, and what we find is that this is a child that was born with these powers. And the powers aren't necessarily spelled out at the beginning of it, but we know that essentially he cannot be exposed to any kind of light. And then slowly we find out exactly why that is. Not necessarily because he can't be poisoned, he's poisoned by light. It's a situation where he interacts with, controls, and manipulates light at his whim. So if he takes in too much light, he will burst, like a solar flare in that kind of situation. But he has the ability to control light. He can bend it so that way he's invisible. He can create energy blasts out of these kind of things. It's a much different kind of power set, and it does a really good job kind of showcasing how those things can work, and it's all told in the form of a letter. And this letter is to what was his former soul friend, who he eventually reconnects with, kind of, as an adult, but it's definitely a pretty good introduction to the character of the Ray. It doesn't necessarily make him feel any more compelling, unfortunately, for Justice League of America. It doesn't do enough to grab me and make him feel like a sympathetic, empathetic, or any kind of character that is immediately relatable, but it does, give some ideas to people that maybe were, shut-ins, lonely, and how they can find acceptance in the world, those kind of things, which I totally understand. It's just that it didn't quite hit didn't pluck at the heartstrings in the right way to make me really feel for the character, but I'm interested to see where Steve Orlando can go with him once Justice League of America starts up. So that is Justice League of America, The Ray, so pick it up if you feel like it's something that might be interesting to you. So those are all the books that I picked up this Wednesday, but I want to know what you guys thought, so hit me up in the comments down below, and we can start conversations about all the different kind of cool things that were happening this week. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.